and I'm usually struggling to think of new ideas or any older ideas to bring back. Um, but then when I do, I'll have quite an intensive week or maybe 2 weeks beforehand putting something together and preparing it and making sure I know what I'm going to talk about and be able to do it right. And then when it doesn't happen for some reason, like last month, I put it to bed and I forget all about it. And I didn't come back to this one until a couple of days ago to try and remind myself of what this talk is about and what the hell I was actually going to say. So I might get this all cobbled up. But this one is, I don't know, a little bit different in that there's an awful lot of conjecture. Well, there's an awful lot of conjecture in everything we think we know about Joseph Williamson and so many unknowns. That's what makes the subject so interesting, really. But some new information has come to light for me, or rather, new to me. Our ace researcher, Don Hyam, passed something to me a few months ago, which really took me aback because he had done some research, and I don't know how accurate this is, but the story sounds very good, and I'm going to go with it. And you can either accept it or not. We'll never know the answers. But it was new information to me over and above what I thought I knew about Joseph Williamson and the earlier part of his life. Now, for years, I've been at this for 15 years now, and very soon after I joined FOWT, people tried to persuade me to become a guide, which I didn't want to do. But I did the usual thing. I followed other guides around for a number of times, picking up the story as best I could, and eventually dived in and, okay, I'll have a go at this. And I've been doing it ever since. And we've been telling the same sort of story over and over again. And it has evolved a bit, but maybe not as much as it should have been. And there's a man sitting here in the audience, Chris Isles, who was the one I followed around as a backmarker when he was guiding groups of visitors more than anybody else, to be honest. And I liked the way he told the story, and I modeled what I talked about on what Chris said. And other guides tell the story in different ways, but nobody really knew whether we were right or wrong. And obviously, when they first started with this 30 years ago, the story hadn't got very far. It's been evolving. Anyway, here we are looking at a slide of what I've been told is Parr Street in Liverpool. I honestly don't know whether it is. It was labelled as Parr Street. When I found it somewhere, I thought, oh, that's good. Never seen an old painting of Parr Street. I'm having that. But I've got a feeling that it may not be Parr Street at all. But I'm gonna keep the slide anyway. This actually is Parr Street. This is a photograph from 1939. It's a bit dismal, isn't it? But we're looking down Parr Street here towards what's beyond, called Wolstenholme Square. And I am reliably told that this building here, number 3 Parr Street, right at the bottom, is what used to be the tobacco warehouse, factory, and the home of Richard Tate and his family, who were tobacco merchants. And this building here, number 4, right next to it, set back further, is also significant. I'll be showing you a picture of this again later. I don't know whether you can make out, there is a sort of bow-shaped end to this wall of number 4 Parr Street. I'll show you it again in a much clearer form a little later. Now, the story that we've been telling for so many years is that young Joseph Williamson, born in 1769, came to Liverpool in 1780 as an 11-year-old boy, and he was taken on by a man called Richard Tate, who was a tobacco merchant who lived in this house, or this building here. So it's a factory warehouse building, but he lived there as well. The story sounds a little bit airy-fairy, and I didn't know whether it was believable. Always had doubts about it. But it's what's been written down and it's what we've had to go with. And the idea of an 11-year-old boy being packed off to walk 15 miles from Warrington to Liverpool in search of work seems a bit far-fetched. We know that the Williamson family, poor family, were living in Warrington, at the time. But we also now believe that the family came over from Yorkshire. A Tate family were living at a place called Gorber Hall near Barnsley in Yorkshire, where they were glassmakers. There was a man called Paul Tate who had two sons, William and Richard. And it seems that at some point Richard has peeled away. Maybe there wasn't enough going for two brothers in the business, and Richard Tate has come over to Liverpool and set himself up in the tobacco business. And it's believed that Williamsons came over from Yorkshire as well, and that probably Williamson's father worked for the Tates. They've come over to Warrington, and very likely some kind of an arrangement is being made by way. This young lad at 11 was packed off to Liverpool, but an arrangement had been made that Mr. Richard Tate, who was known to the family, was going to give him a job. And he came to Liverpool. He was taken on by Mr. Richard Tate. He lodged in their home, and he presumably had a job as something like a junior clerk. And he worked his way up through the company and was a bright lad and very well thought of. And that's how the story went that I've been relaying from other people until he reached the top, being a very clever person, ended up managing the business. And then eventually in 1802, he married the boss's daughter. And that clinched his position. And then he took over the Tate family business. Well, all seems a bit too neat and tidy. And now, a few months ago, a new piece of information has come our way. And this information has been around for a few years, I believe, but it hasn't been shared very widely. And when it came to me, I was absolutely gobsmacked. I thought, why didn't I know any of this before? Anyway, the story I'm now being told is that Williamson didn't stay with the Tate family right through this period. He may have stayed for a few years. Now, Richard Tate died in 1787. That's only about 7 years after Joseph Williamson came to work for him. Excuse me. And Williamson would have been 18 at the time. So Richard Tate had a son called Thomas Moss Tate, this gentleman here, and also a daughter, a bit younger, Elizabeth Tate. I'll go back to Thomas. And when Richard Tate died at the age of 51, I have a feeling that his son and his daughter, who were perhaps not at all ready to be taking over a tobacco business, they were both artists and musicians. They were probably thinking they were going to have a fairly easy life off the back of their father's business. And then all of a sudden they're thrown into the deep end and they had to manage the father's business themselves. Now, Thomas Moss Tate was not a particularly healthy man by all accounts. It seems that after taking over the business of his father, he was off and away around the south of England, visiting various spa towns, looking for a cure for his stomach ailments and probably never finding one. Leaving his younger sister, Elizabeth, who was only about 21, to try and manage the family business and struggling perhaps in a man's world. So this wasn't a particularly satisfactory situation for either of them. Elizabeth Tate, at the age of about 21 when her father died, was very definitely an artist and a musician. Her father had been as well, and her brother was. And I think she was leading rather a pleasant life as a young lady about town and not expecting things to change too much. Just down the street from where they lived in Wolstenholme Square was possibly the home, but quite definitely the business premises of a man called John Casson and his family. John Casson was a musician. He had a shop where he was selling musical instruments, probably repairing musical instruments. He was an organist. He played organ in the church. And he had two daughters. He may have had more daughters, but I know that he had a daughter, Eleanor, who was about the same age as Elizabeth Tate, and they were great friends. Eleanor also played organ, and she played, in fact, sometimes at St. Thomas's Church, just down the road. St. Thomas's Church was the family church of the Tate family, and became the family church of Joseph Williamson. In fact, Joseph and Elizabeth were married in St. Thomas's Church. No longer there, of course, but a great tie-up there. And there was a younger sister as well. This was Margaret Casson. This is her portrait. And at the age of 7, she was a child prodigy. She was playing organ recitals in front of audiences at the age of 7. So quite something. And these people were all great friends. And I have a feeling that Elizabeth and Thomas were not at all in the right frame of mind to be taking over their family's tobacco business, but had no option really. They needed to live, and he'd upped and died on them. So just going back to this one for a moment, remember this is number 3, which was the Tate's family home and business premises. And this one, number 4, see that bow-shaped end to the building? Here it is again. Some of you may remember the Cream nightclub. This warehouse building became the Cream nightclub in later years. I'm sure some people may remember having gone there when they were younger. And this is all that's left of it. It was at least 3 stories high, but you can still see that rounded end there when it was reduced down to a single story. So this was number 4, and number 3 had been next door where the Tate family business and home was. And then in this picture, you can see the same building again with that rounded end wall. And down the street there, you're looking into Wolstenholme Square. And this funny thing in the middle, we'll call it an art installation. It's a series of multicolored lights hanging on funny twisted stems, and it's called Penelope. I've got absolutely no idea why it's called Penelope, but there it is. And that's still there to this day. Now, back in February, we had a talk for our February members meeting by a man called Rob Jones, and he gave us a talk on the history of the tobacco trade in Liverpool, which is a very interesting talk. I enjoyed it immensely, and it opened my eyes. Well, the talk didn't particularly open my eyes, but the one thing I remember is he told us that in 1900, I remember that the Stanley Dock tobacco bonded warehouse was opened in 1902. It was absolutely massive. The building's still there, but it's converted into flats. But during the war, that tobacco warehouse housed enough tobacco to keep the whole country going for 2 years. So that's what the tobacco business in Liverpool had turned into by that time, with massive companies like Ogden's and Imperial Tobacco and the like. Of course, most of the tobacco would have been coming into the country from the Americas via Liverpool. But at the end of this, Rob got me thinking about what the tobacco trade might have been like in the days of the Tate family involvement and Williamson. And he put me straight and put a completely different slant on it. And it seems that in those days, tobacco companies would have been much, much smaller affairs. And whereas I had been thinking that perhaps Williamson owned his own ships, and we used to relay stories that were passed down to us about maybe Williamson living up on the heights of Edge Hill could look down over the town and the Welsh hills beyond and the River Mersey and watch out for his ships coming into the docks. Giving the impression perhaps, or maybe I just got the wrong end of the stick, giving the impression that Williamson was importing whole shiploads of tobacco from the Americas and maybe even owned his own ships. Well, it looks like it wasn't like that. It was probably on a very much smaller scale. And Rob Jones told us about how the tobacco in the fields of Virginia and elsewhere in the USA were packaged into these things, hogsheads. And hogsheads of tobacco would be rolled along the roads and down to the docks, down to the Mississippi maybe, or the Atlantic coast where the ports were. And these things would weigh several tons. I think he suggested that they would be about 4 tons in weight. And perhaps the Tate family business were just buying in 1 or 2 hogsheads of tobacco at a time, rather than a much larger enterprise. I just found these on the internet and thought it was quite interesting. These are the hogsheads of tobaccos making their way down to the docks to be loaded onto the ships to cross the Atlantic. And if, as Rob tells us, it was quite likely that these companies who are dealing in tobacco, processing tobacco into pipe tobacco and snuff at this time, were all on a very much smaller scale, and they tended to live on the premises. And that was because a cargo of tobacco like this, whether it's one hogshead or a couple or several, very, very valuable commodity. By the time you paid for it, paid the excise duty, released it from the bonded warehouse and got it to your own premises, you need to keep very close eye on that. You need to make sure that you weren't robbed, have your warehouse broken into and stolen or set on fire. And so they tended to live and work on the same premises. And this is what looks like was going on for the Tate family in Parr Street. So at the time, we've got now two young people, 25 and 21, who are thrown into the deep end and trying to run this tobacco business that their father had set up and struggling a bit. Thomas was away a lot of the time. Elizabeth definitely struggling in a man's world, having to try and keep the business going. And what I'm realizing now, what I'm being told now, is that Joseph Williamson did not stay right through with the Tate family. He may have stayed with them for several years after his original boss, Richard Tate, died, maybe into his mid-20s or something, carrying on working for Thomas and Elizabeth Tate. But he did eventually move away. He was obviously an enterprising man and had a good business head on his shoulders. And he moved off to seek his fortune elsewhere, by the look of it, and had ambitions. And he got tied up with this man here. First of all, he managed to get himself into partnership with a man called William Lee. That's Leigh, who was already a successful and fairly wealthy merchant who was dealing in groceries. He was importing and exporting groceries. And Joseph Williamson, very much junior partner, but managed to get himself into partnership with William Lee because he brought with him the knowledge about the tobacco trade, which William Lee didn't have. So he was a useful asset to the company, and they thrived. William Lee had a younger brother by the name of Joseph Lee, and he'd been set up in business, in the tobacco business in Warrington, I believe. And at some point, he's come to Liverpool. He's joined the partnership. And at some point, William Lee, who was probably older, perhaps retired. And so we now have a partnership of Lee and Williamson, who were predominantly in the tobacco trade, but they were presumably exporting tobacco. And we think it was dealing with the Baltic states and probably importing things like timber and possibly salt. This is what I'm being told. And their business seems to have thrived very well. And it's thrived so well, in fact, that Joseph Lee managed to move into this house. It's a house called Belmont in Great Budworth in Cheshire. Now, I really don't know whether Joseph Lee had this house built for himself or whether he just moved into the house. Never been told that bit of information, but I have visited that house, and several of FOWT's members who were doing research a number of years ago have visited the house. It's been a school now for many years, but the descendants of the Lee family were still living in one wing of the house, and our people went to talk to them, and they even saw what they believed was possibly a portrait of Joseph Williamson hanging in there, although it couldn't be said for sure whether it was Joseph Williamson. But anyway, it shows that these people were making an awful lot of money. Williamson presumably was still a junior partner, and Joseph Lee was the senior partner. But even so, they were doing very, very well. And I believe, from what I'm being told now, that by about 1798, they were doing so well that they needed more warehousing space. I'm going to assume that Joseph Williamson had kept in touch over the years with his previous um, employers, Richard Tate and Thomas and Elizabeth, maybe kept in touch with them on a regular basis, maybe stayed very friendly with them, would have no doubt heard, if not by speaking to them, but on the grapevine, that the Tates may have been struggling a bit and not getting on as well as they would have hoped. And he was thriving, and his business with Joseph Lee was definitely wanting to expand and needing more warehousing space. And it looks as if he's come back to the Tates and approached them about maybe renting some warehousing space. Now, I can't say how this happened or exactly what happened, and I don't think anybody else will be able to. But I'm going to go with this story because it seems very plausible, rather than what I've been told in earlier times. And by about 1802, in 1802, we know that Joseph Williamson married Elizabeth Tate. Now, the negotiations might have been going on for quite some time. Excuse me. And who will ever know? It was quite common in those days that people married for convenience or for business reasons. And this may have happened. It may have been all a business arrangement that suited all parties. I'm quite sure that Thomas Moss Tate was looking forward to retiring and living the life of a gentleman. Elizabeth Tate would have been glad to have been shut of the responsibility of running the tobacco business and making a living out of it and going back to the life of being a lady. Joseph Williamson was looking to expand with his partner and looking for more warehousing space. And in the end, the arrangement that was made was that Joseph and Elizabeth were to marry. He'd known Elizabeth Tate since he was an 11-year-old boy and she was 14. Who knows? He might have fancied her from the word go as soon as he moved into the Tate's home as a junior employee. He might have liked her all those years and got on very well with her. Or he might not. We just don't know. It might have been a pure business arrangement. But in the end, they did marry. And what happened then was that Joseph moved back into the Tate family home stroke warehouse stroke factory. And Thomas Moss Tate moved out and moved into the house next door for a time, which became eventually the Cream nightclub. I'm pretty sure that Thomas Moss Tate eventually retired as a gentleman on the proceeds of his half of the Tate business, and he went to live in Egbert. I know he's buried at St. Michael's Church in Egbert. We've been to see the grave there. And so Joseph Williamson and Elizabeth became married in 1802. He took over the Tate family business, absorbed it into his own business empire with Joseph Lee, and they thrived. And Elizabeth no longer needed to worry about being a businesswoman. So this lasted for a few years until Joseph Williamson and Elizabeth decided it was time they moved out, and they moved up to Edge Hill. And the rest of the story we know. His life changed then. He was not far away. He was 1.5 miles outside of town, obviously, and he still able to come down to town every day for business. And he didn't actually retire from the tobacco business until I think 1818. But all the time he was building houses in Edge Hill and digging tunnels underneath them. And that's what happened. And I think I'm inclined to believe this account of things, even though there can't be any proof of it at all. So there we go. A few weeks ago, just a few days before I was due to put this talk together for last month, I took a walk down Parr Street and into Wolstenholme Square, just to remind myself of what the place looked like and to see if I could get any photographs of any nice buildings that might have survived from that time. I got a bit of a surprise, actually. This is the towards the bottom end of Parr Street, going down the hill. And this building here on the right of Parr Street, as we were walking down, looks as if it was probably dating from those days, late 1700s. And then as we look a little bit further down beyond that building down the street, you're looking into Wolstenholme Square, and this is that art installation, Penelope, still sitting there. But I got an almighty shock when I found the Cream building, number 4, Parr Street, has been replaced by this modern office building or cafe or something there. And just beyond it is where number 3, the Tate's family home and factory, used to stand. All gone, all now modern office buildings. Somewhere further down the street there would have been John Cassin's music shop, but nothing else left. And then looking straight across the street from where number 3 and number 4 were, I have a feeling that this building here probably still dates back from the days of Tate's and Williamson down there. But beyond that, it's all modern. And then right down at the bottom of the square, this is another survivor, I think. It's now a pub, but you can quite clearly see that this is actually, I hadn't realised, but Wolstenholme Square empties out into this little street here, which is called Gradwell Street, and that leads down into Hanover Street. So we'll all know where we are from Hanover Street. And this building still exists as a pub now, but as you can see, these tall opening window type doors here, and the lift above it for the hoist, are the giveaway to say that in those days this would have been a warehouse job, and goods would have been hauled up from the street and into the upper rooms. You can just imagine these hogsheads of tobacco maybe going into a similar building that the Tates owned on the other side of the street. But that's about all that's left there now. I was quite surprised at how much of it had gone. But it is what it is, and time moves on. So here we are. These are the 2 people involved. Joseph Williamson there, his 50th birthday portrait. Very nice portrait. And on the right, the portrait of his wife, Elizabeth, known to him as Betty. And this, of course, was a portrait made when she was very much younger. She would have been somewhere around 20, 21 at that time. Just around that point where her life suddenly changed when her father died, and the whole world changed for her, and she had to move into business. Now, I've got absolutely no idea about these 2, and nobody will ever know. Were they in love? Did they get married for love? Was it purely business arrangement? Was it a mixture of both? Nobody's ever going to tell us. But there are just 1 or 2 little snippets I've got. I won't say they're clues because I'm still no better off. But the historian James Stonehouse has written a little bit, just a little bit, about the life of these 2, as relayed to him, presumably by neighbours or friends, when he interviewed them just a little while after Williamson died. And one little snippet says, Williamson is supposed to have quoted, "I'll tell you what, Betty and I led but a cat and dog life of it, but I was sorry to part with the old girl when she did go." I think that sounds as if they loved each other, but you can't be sure, can you? And then 1 other little snippet, and he's written down here, "Once, after a little matrimonial tiff, Williamson vowed that he wished he was a bachelor again, to be at liberty. Opening the doors of his wife's aviary, he let all the birds out, saying, 'There, see how the poor little devils like to get free.' Many a married man would like to have wings and the doors of wedlock thrown open so that they might fly away and be at rest." So I dare say that's the sort of thing that might have passed between a man and wife regularly. People always fall out. People have arguments. They will fight at times. But whether they married for love or whether it was just a pure business arrangement, we're never going to know. But that's about all I can say about it. You make up your own mind. So there you go.